talk about the common character tropes Hollywood loves to write for disabled narratives. You either find a film that is incredibly inspiring, or you find the opposite, a tragic, pathos-heavy story. I watched Me Before You when it came out in theaters in 2016 when I was in high school. Admittedly, before college, I lived in a heavily able-bodied and somewhat ableist environment. When I watched the movie with friends, I was overcome with emotion, specifically with such grief and sadness. And at the time, I thought, wow, this is a highly emotional love story. But later on, I seemed to realize I got a lot wrong. I have to admit that prior to joining the DCP at UCLA, I wasn't that educated as it pertained to the disabled community. And being an able-bodied individual, watching these films, it never fully resonated with me how problematic it could be. But spoiler alert, Me Before You perpetuates the notion that death is better than living with a disability. So let's rewind and just talk about the general plot of the film. Me Before You is meant to be a romantic drama, and it brings to life the novel Me Before You by English author Jojo Moyes. The film stars Emilia Clarke and Sam Claflin, I believe is his name. Emilia Clarke plays a young, quirky character who needs a job to support her family and make ends meet. She then meets Will Traynor, who is played by Sam Claflin, an able-bodied actor, who is a wealthy young banker who was left quadriplegic 2 years earlier from an accident. For the majority of the film, the audience feels Louisa and her love could save Will from himself, and somehow love is the cure. And ultimately, Will decides to commit assisted suicide, leaving his massive fortune to his beloved Louisa. My God, here is yet another Hollywood narrative of disability that not only trivializes the real struggles that people with disabilities face every day, but at the same time glorifies suicide as the one and only option someone with such a disability has. While this may be the lived experience and the truth for some people with a disability as quadriplegia, the film tends to portray this as the only option, thereby conflating disability with an unbearable existence. Jojo Moyes, the author of Me Before You, has responded to claims that the film is ableist. The author says she was initially surprised, seeing as, quote, "In 4.5 years of reader responses, I never had anybody take that message from this story." She explains that the story was inspired by her own family situations of having relatives who required 24-hour care, as well as a real-life news story about a quadriplegic man who persuaded his parents to take him to a center for assisted suicide, which she found profoundly shocking. Perhaps the takeaway should be to not exploit the experiences of the disabled community, despite the fact that you have witnessed someone with quadriplegia who asked for an assisted suicide. While this narrative is important to consider and acknowledge, we cannot deny that Hollywood has this obsession with exploiting a tragic, pathos-heavy story. More than that, the decision to opt for an able-bodied actor, able-bodied writers, and able-bodied producers and directors, it just reminds me that representation goes beyond the screen. It matters off-screen just as much, if not more so. Moyes adds, "The fact is, in the film as in the book, nobody else agrees with what he decides to do. This is not by any means sending out a message. It's just about one character. It's nothing more than that." It's interesting. Perhaps her novel, which I haven't read, perhaps her novel did make that clear, and the film just tended to portray it as the one and only option. But I would like to know what you guys think, so leave your comments below and stay tuned for our next episode, which will focus on Eddie Redmayne's portrayal both as Stephen Hawking in The Theory of Everything and as a trans woman in The Danish Girl. This next segment in the episode We'll discuss the parallels between these two films and specifically the importance of accurate representation. So stay tuned, I think it's a really interesting discussion.